Long before the pyramids and spectacular temples sprawled across Egypt, King Narmer founded the first dynasty in pharaonic history. For over 3,000 years, 345 pharaohs succeeded one another until the inevitable fall of ancient Egypt. Some of these rulers would achieve a kind of immortality. Among them, Cleopatra.
Cleopatra is the queen of communication.
She was a superwoman of the past. She has become not only a myth, but an icon.
Who was she? How did she manage to vanquish her rivals and become a true political leader? How did she forge alliances to strengthen her influence?
She had had romantic relationships with two of the most powerful men in the Roman world. It was all the kinds of scandals you could ever possibly imagine.
Can you imagine what it's like for a man to find himself face to face with a queen who receives him half naked and talks politics to boot?
How did she revitalize her kingdom's economy? How had she restored Egypt's image on the international stage?
She wanted to control prices and prevent inflation of bronze coins, which had a very favorable effect on the people.
She was not only a woman of believed beauty, but also of immense political power and intellectualism.
Now, leading international experts share their insights to reveal the true story of Egypt's most famous queen and her reign of scandal and betrayal right up to her extraordinary death.
She is bitten by a snake hidden in a basket of figs.
Here are the final secrets of Cleopatra's unique journey. A pharaoh queen whose life transformed ancient Egypt and changed the course of history. Alexandria. Beneath the streets of the modern city lie the vestiges of a vanished city. 2,000 years ago, this Mediterranean port was the capital of the last pharaohs of Egypt.
Alexandria was one of the most beautiful cities in the ancient world. Visitors came to this city and they wrote about its grandeur. They wrote about how beautiful it was.
There would have been a great amount of wonderful buildings, including the Library of Alexandria, the Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, amongst many other beautiful temples and palaces that were constructed at the time.
It was in this grandiose setting that one of history's most tragic events was to unfold. The fall of the greatest civilization of antiquity and its 3,000 years of extraordinary reign. This terrible end of the pharaohs is associated with their last leader, Egypt's most famous queen, Cleopatra.
Cleopatra was a woman who left her mark in history. There was nobody, no man, no woman at the time that could rival her political savviness, her cultural know-how, or even her ability to convey her thoughts.
Sadly, we have so few sources of Cleopatra in Egypt that are actually written by Egyptians. So how she was perceived by Egyptians, how she ruled in Egypt, this is one of our big mysteries of archaeology.
This pharaoh queen ruled the land of the pyramids for almost 21 years. 21 years during which she overcame numerous obstacles to become a formidable strategist and a powerful woman. But how could such a sovereign have prevented the decline of the civilization of the pharaohs? Between myth and reality, who was Cleopatra?
She was a woman who actually exercised political power in a world generally dominated by men. So she's an exception. And then there's a whole series of nefarious elements associated with Cleopatra. Sex, all kinds of excesses. So you could say that Cleopatra is an explosive cocktail of politics and eroticism.
We love scandal, we love gossip, we love political intrigue, we love sex, we love drama, we love all these things. And the story of Cleopatra has all of that combined into one. And the fact that she's so enigmatic is something that makes people want to know even more.
To understand how Cleopatra came to be involved in such a symbolic moment in history, we need to go back in time to where it all began for her. To the year 69 BCE in Alexandria. The young Cleopatra was born in the sumptuous palaces of the ancient capital. She came from a long line of pharaohs of Macedonian origin, the 33rd and last of the Egyptian dynasties, that of the Ptolemies.
The Ptolemaic family is directly descended from General Ptolemy, one of the Diadochi, who accompanied Alexander the Great. Ptolemy I, who ensured that Alexandria became the new capital of pharaonic Egypt.
The Ptolemaic dynasty was a bit of an oddity for Egyptian history. They practiced many things that were Greek. They spoke Greek language. They also took on many aspects of Egyptian religion and Egyptian culture. So to the ancient Egyptians, it must have been a bit of a strange thing, because on the one hand, they had rulers that were foreign, that weren't connecting to them fully. On the other hand, they had their religion and culture being maintained, at least on the ground level.
In Cleopatra's time, the land of Egypt was nothing like it had been 3 centuries earlier during the reign of the first Ptolemy. The kingdom lost its independence and became a Roman protectorate.
It had the agricultural resources that Rome so desperately needed. It was also in a strategic location between all the places that the Roman Empire was expanding. And the Ptolemaic Empire was ruling Egypt, and that was also sort of culturally and ideologically something very important for the Romans. This was seen as a great source of civilization.
Rome had not become the monolithic beast that it would become during the empire. It's still the republic at this point in time. Alexandria was the capital of the Mediterranean. So what was important about ensuring that there was a Roman and Egyptian relationship was that it was symbiotic.
If pharaonic Egypt had lost its prestige, it was largely due to Cleopatra's father, Pharaoh Ptolemy XII. Although very wealthy, he was a politically weak king.
He was ousted by an uprising of his people in 58 BCE and brought back to the throne by Roman intervention against his own people. He really is the Romans' puppet.
In the catacombs of Alexandria, Egyptologist Meredith Brand surveys the various levels dug into the rock in search of clues to Cleopatra's multicultural heritage. In a burial chamber, she notices an illustration of the queen's Macedonian and Egyptian influences.
This is a perfect example of the religion of Cleopatra. We have the Egyptian belief in mummification and the afterlife, with a mummy here and the gods connected to the Egyptian concept of the afterlife. But the actual sarcophagus has Greek motifs on the bottom. There's garlands of flowers and these faces of Greek figures.
While her father's legacy and the history of the dynasty to which she belonged are well known, her mother's life remains an enigma. No official text speaks of her. But that doesn't stop specialists from speculating.
It's possible that Cleopatra's mother was Cleopatra VI, sister and wife of Ptolemy XII. But Strabo, the ancient geographer, tells us that Cleopatra was not legitimate. If so, it's possible that Cleopatra's mother was a concubine, perhaps Egyptian, of Ptolemy XII, because we know that the Ptolemies had many concubines.
What we do know is that her mother died giving birth to her. Cleopatra grew up in her father's palace in Alexandria, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the Mediterranean basin. It was here that she received a brilliant education from the greatest scholars and intellectuals of the ancient world.
She was an Alexandrian princess, and she would have been educated on all aspects of Alexandrian knowledge, which would have included oratory, the art of discussion and persuasion, science, mathematics, philosophy. In short, she was following an education that might be parallel to Alexander the Great's.
She's obviously an extremely intelligent woman, and I'd even go so far as to say that today we would consider her gifted.
Educated at Alexandria's famous library and in the halls of power of her father Pharaoh's palace, she also traveled extensively. She often accompanied Ptolemy XII to Rome, where she rubbed shoulders with the upper echelons of the Roman aristocracy.
She would have grown up in the palace around her father, around administrators, around education, and so she would have been surrounded by learned people, surrounded by politics.
Young Cleopatra didn't know it at the time, but her great destiny would make her one of history's most fascinating queens. Before ascending to the throne of Egypt, she had to overcome many challenges and remain vigilant to the movements of her enemies, starting with her brothers and sisters. The eldest of 5 siblings, she grew up in a tense and dangerous atmosphere, for the Ptolemies were not a family like any other.
In Cleopatra's time, the Ptolemaic family wasn't exactly a tender-hearted bunch. Everyone wanted power, and they were prepared to kill their siblings, fathers, or children to get it. Cleopatra saw her own older sister stage a coup against her father, and her father kill his eldest daughter.
The ancient Ptolemies very much had a mentality of kill or be killed. Murder was kind of the norm.
In 52 BCE, her father, Pharaoh Ptolemy XII, associated her with the throne to prepare her for his succession. A foretaste of power that would take a major turn a few months later in 51 BCE when Ptolemy XII died. Cleopatra was 17 years old and the pharaoh queen of Egypt. Well, actually, she wasn't really alone. In his will, her father ordered her to marry her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a common practice in this dynasty.
The two of them were supposed to co-rule, and this was a very normal practice for the Ptolemaic dynasty. And that didn't last long. They quickly escalated into fights, and the two of them had open conflict, open warfare.
Cleopatra was ambitious and had a clear vision of what she wanted for her kingdom. The problem was that her 14-year-old younger brother was easily influenced and surrounded by advisors who intended to wield power through him.
All these men would form a coterie against Cleopatra and gang up on her. Clearly, Cleopatra is not going to take this lying down, and the end result is exile. Her life is in danger as Ptolemy VIII demands that she leaves Egypt or he will kill her.
She leaves for Syria to raise an army with the firm ambition of overthrowing her brother. It's at this point that Cleopatra meets a man who will change her life forever. A man whose name would forever be associated with her. The most powerful man in the world, Julius Caesar. In the midst of a civil war with his former general Pompey, he leads his troops into Egypt, where Pompey has entrenched himself.
At this point in time, Julius Caesar's troops have laid siege to Alexandria. He's got about 4,000 people that are inside, and they have laid siege to the Palace of Alexandria, where Cleopatra's brother Ptolemy is at this point.
Panicked by the sight of Julius Caesar on his doorstep, Ptolemy XIII has his men assassinate Pompey. He thought this would win Caesar's trust, but the opposite happens.
He realizes, well, this child is not such a great person to have in charge here. He views this as a liability, and furthermore, Ptolemy is not able to come up with the money to repay the debts.
The year is 47 BCE. Caesar decides to winter in Alexandria. Exiled to the eastern frontier of the Kingdom of Egypt, Cleopatra chooses to enter the scene with a spectacular maneuver that will help build her legend. On a cold, silent night, a ship docks in the middle of the Roman fleet in the port of Alexandria. A man disembarks with a message. He has a gift for Julius Caesar.
The story goes that the gift is a large carpet, that it's unrolled at Julius Caesar's feet, and at the end of the carpet, a young woman of 20 or 21, Cleopatra, appears. She had used this subterfuge both to be able to return to Alexandria without being caught by her brother and his soldiers, but also to seduce Caesar, because it took some nerve to pull off such a stratagem. And she hits the nail on the head.
She offers herself as a sort of gift to Julius Caesar, who becomes her lover that very evening.
At this point in time, we have the story of the romance between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra begin to develop. So it's from this amazing story that we have this famous love story that really has lasted the ages.
But the story isn't to the taste of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra's younger brother and pharaoh of Egypt. This alliance between his sister and Julius Caesar directly threatens his power. He must act.
Ptolemy XIII unleashes an Egyptian revolt against Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, who have taken refuge in the royal palace in Alexandria.
After several months of fighting, and thanks to Roman reinforcements arriving in Egypt in early 47 BCE, Julius Caesar defeated the 14-year-old pharaoh's armies. But Ptolemy XIII did not accept this failure. He fled to the south of the country. Caesar pursued him and forced a decisive battle that proved fatal for Cleopatra's brother.
He died in the Battle of the Nile, his ship sunk, and he drowned. So in this way, Julius Caesar was able to help Cleopatra defeat her brother, solidified by the support from the Roman state, as well as Julius Caesar's partnership with her. She was able to ascend to the throne of Egypt, and she would become Egypt's last pharaoh.
In fact, she married her last younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, then aged 12 and still in a co-regency. But she wielded all the political power and was ready to rule. A charismatic strategist and diplomat, she was also a polyglot.
She was the first Ptolemaic pharaoh who was able to speak Egyptian. So she was an effective leader as well as an effective international diplomat because she was educated in how to conduct herself with the utmost propriety and respect.
Little did this exceptional woman imagine that she would become the last pharaoh of Egypt. Following her mythical meeting with Julius Caesar and the death of her brother, the pharaoh queen sought to consolidate her alliance with the Roman dictator. A fine tactician, she did so in the most striking and romantic way possible.
She took advantage of this moment of peace to have a honeymoon with Julius Caesar. It's said that she took him down the Nile on a magnificent boat, a veritable floating palace, to show him all the riches of her country.
We can imagine them visiting the main temples of the Nile Valley together. Julius Caesar, like Alexander the Great before him, was extremely curious. He must have spoken with the Egyptian priests, the high priests who welcomed him to Egypt's main sanctuaries. He wanted to visit the Nile Valley with Cleopatra.
This cruise on the Nile added a little more to the legendary romance between the most famous of the pharaoh queens and the great Roman conqueror. It ended in apotheosis as Cleopatra became pregnant by Julius Caesar.
She does everything she can to get pregnant by the most powerful Roman of the moment, because she clearly sees that she can't rule alone. That's why, in ancient times, she was sometimes called a prostitute. She did offer herself to Julius Caesar, but in fact she had little choice.
But an event cut short this Roman-Egyptian idyll. In the spring of 47 BCE, when Cleopatra was 7 months pregnant, Julius Caesar had to leave his beloved. He had to go to the southern coast of present-day Turkey to stop the insurrection of his vassals. He didn't know it then, but he would never return to Egypt. Some months later, Julius Caesar returned to Rome victorious, preceded by a sign bearing what would become his most famous phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. A year later, in September 46 BCE, he was joined by Cleopatra.
Julius Caesar couldn't accommodate Cleopatra in his home because he's already married to Calpurnia. But fortunately, he's very rich. He has other houses. And he installs Cleopatra in his property on the other side of the Tiber, in what is now Trastevere.
The pharaoh queen didn't arrive alone. In the meantime, she had given birth to their son, Caesarion.
Julius Caesar acknowledges his paternity. He cannot legally consider Caesarion his son because he is already married. But he acknowledges his biological paternity by allowing Cleopatra to name her son Caesar.
This little Egyptian prince was destined to embody the perfect alliance between the Republic of Rome and the Kingdom of Egypt. From that moment on, Caesar never stopped proving his love and admiration for Cleopatra. In Rome, when he inaugurated his forum, a public square built in honor of the goddess Venus, he had a statue of Cleopatra erected. Once he had completely pacified the Roman territorial empire, he celebrated a gigantic feast in honor of his victories and reserved a gift for the pharaoh queen.
In his victory over Egypt, he parades Cleopatra's little sister, Arsinoe, like a hostage. Obviously, Cleopatra is very happy because she can't stand her little sister, who's a political rival anyway.
Cleopatra and Julius Caesar formed a powerful couple, full of promise for the unity of the Mediterranean world. But not everyone saw this relationship in a positive light.
Romans at the time had a very strong sense of national identity, and to see their leader cohorting with a foreign woman, well, this was a little bit of an issue in the public image. So when Cleopatra comes and she's covered in gold and glitter and she's presenting herself like a goddess, she's not necessarily well received by the Romans.
The Romans freed themselves from their king. For them, king and queen are synonymous with tyranny. So they have at least two reasons to hate Cleopatra. She's a queen and she's a woman.
But Julius Caesar doesn't care. He's put Cleopatra in a place of power, and nothing and no one can stand in her way. Except that an unexpected event precipitates Cleopatra's destiny towards new horizons. It's March 44 BCE. Cleopatra had been in Rome at Caesar's side for a year and a half when the unthinkable happened. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, is assassinated.
Cleopatra must leave Rome in a hurry. She knows she has no allies left, so as soon as she learns that Julius Caesar has been stabbed to death in the early hours of the Ides of March, 2 or 3 hours later, she's already on a boat bound for Egypt.
She was no longer safe. She did not have Julius Caesar to protect her from the plebeians of Rome.
On arrival in Alexandria, she made some radical decisions. She had her younger brother and co-regent, Ptolemy XIV, assassinated. She enthroned her son, Caesarion, who became pharaoh under the name Ptolemy XV Caesarion.
He's barely 3 years old. He is officially the new pharaoh of Egypt, and Cleopatra is a queen mother. She acts as regent for Caesarion.
Cleopatra is no puppet when she's in power. She's a real queen. And once she's eliminated her 2 little brothers, and her partner in power is her son, Ptolemy XV Caesarion, it's obvious she's in sole charge of her country.
Her task was not an easy one, for Egypt was not what it used to be. Her predecessors impoverished the kingdom and its people by making it dependent on the Romans.
Her father and grandfather had come into a series of large loans and debts to the Romans, and as a result of which, the Egyptian state at the time was not doing so well. Furthermore, they often neglected the kingdom and lived a life of leisure and debauchery, which led to a lot of issues in the Egyptian kingdom.
To remedy this situation, Cleopatra completely reorganized the kingdom's administration and put in place a solid bureaucratic system. In just 10 years, she managed to revitalize the Egyptian economy by reforming the currency.
She wanted to control prices and prevent the inflation of bronze coins, which had a very favorable effect on the people, mostly on the poor who used these bronze coins. So she really was a great political leader.
At the same time, she followed in the footsteps of the great pharaoh builders such as Ramses II, Khufu, and Djoser, and continued to build monuments to her own glory and that of her son. The most emblematic of these is the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, north of Luxor. Egyptian archaeologist Yasser Ibrahim surveys this ancient site. Cleopatra is depicted on one of the temple's facades.
She is standing on the left behind her son, Caesarion, and they are both presenting offerings to several gods and goddesses. She is wearing the double feather crown with the disc. This is a prominent iconography known to Isis.
Isis is one of the most important and popular goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. Sister and wife of Osiris, the god of the dead, she is the bringer of civilization and protector of the dead. She is the mother of Horus, god of heaven and royalty.
People looked at Isis and they saw the model of an ideal mother, someone who was loving, nurturing, caring.
Isis was the great magician who resurrected her brother and husband Osiris and had a child, Horus, to place on the throne of Egypt. Cleopatra used this as a kind of propaganda, applying the image to herself through the assassination of Caesar, who represented Osiris. She herself is represented as Isis and protects the heir to the throne, Horus/Caesarion.
Cleopatra is the queen of communication. She uses all the Egyptian codes to communicate with her people.
While all was going well in Egypt, Cleopatra had to secure a new alliance in order to retain control of her kingdom. Julius Caesar's death has sparked a civil war in the Roman world between his heirs and his assassins.
Cleopatra sat and was seeing what was happening, and she aligned herself with two people that would become very important to the later life of Cleopatra. One would be Octavian, and the other would be Marc Antony.
Together, they defeated Julius Caesar's assassins and restored order. But now, they're battling it out to become the most important man in the Mediterranean world. Cleopatra must choose between the two.
Cleopatra needed to be aligned with Rome. There was really no other option. Rome was vital, and she had to make the right alliance with the right person in the fights after the assassination of Julius Caesar.
She doesn't have that many options. She can either get closer to Octavian, Julius Caesar's nephew and adopted son, or she can get close to Marc Antony, Julius Caesar's symbolic heir general. Octavian's not a good match. He's a cold man, not very sensual. It would be difficult to win him over. Marc Antony is another matter. She knows he's a bon vivant, a fan of the Hellenistic world, so she'll be able to seduce him with an Oriental lifestyle.
In the year 41 BCE, Marc Antony was in Tars, which is now southern Turkey, raising an army to conquer lands to the east.
He summoned Cleopatra to bring her army because she'd been dragging her feet on sending him soldiers. After a while, Cleopatra arrived in Tars, but she wanted to make a theatrical entrance.
It's told that Cleopatra arrived with a convoy that would make any modern-day parade jealous.
She arrives on an extraordinary boat with purple sails, a golden prow that reflects the sun, silver oars, and her crew, sublime half-naked girls rowing. Extraordinary. It's a spectacle that reaches Tars. She arrives at the port and says, "No, I'm not disembarking. If Marc Antony wants to see me, he can come tonight. I'll invite him to dinner."
Julius Caesar's former general is impressed by the spectacle. He accepts the invitation of this unusual queen, unaware that his life will be changed forever.
He's greeted by divine, half-naked girls with candles all over the place. And he's led to Cleopatra, who's lying under a canopy. Cleopatra is certainly waiting, half-naked and adorned with jewels for Marc Antony. Can you imagine what it's like for a man to find himself face to face with a half-naked queen who's talking politics to boot?
Marc Antony is 42. Cleopatra is now 28. By reproducing the same bold strategy she had used with Julius Caesar, Cleopatra seduced the great Roman ruler, who became her lover that very evening.
It was almost like a force of nature meeting another hurricane.
Cleopatra invited Marc Antony to live with her in Alexandria. As with Caesar before him, she introduced him to the pleasures of the Orient. They spent the winter of 41 BCE in the Alexandrian palace amid incredible splendor.
It's well documented that Cleopatra and Marc Antony would go out drinking together, often wearing disguises so they weren't recognized by the public. So the winters that they spent together were nothing other than debaucherous good fun that would make even any modern person believe how scandalous their romance was.
Marc Antony allows himself to be drawn into this inimitable lifestyle. But the opposing propaganda, Octavian's propaganda, would criticize it as debauchery, as lust.
Buoyed by this new alliance, Cleopatra and Marc Antony embarked on an ambitious project. Together, they planned to expand Egypt's borders.
They pushed their powers and fought with the king of Armenia. They fought in Pergamum. They fought many different places, and they had a vision of expanding the Ptolemaic Empire to what it was in the beginning of the Ptolemaic Empire.
The union between these two great politicians of antiquity was not well received in Rome, especially by Octavian. Firstly, Marc Antony was already married to Octavian's sister, with whom he had 2 daughters. Secondly, Marc Antony adopted Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. And finally, because the pharaoh queen gave Marc Antony 3 children.
And to make the Romans hate Marc Antony, Octavian would tell them all about it. Did you know, people of Rome, that Marc Antony intends to take the lands he conquered in the east and give them to the children he has with the Egyptian whore, Cleopatra?
To the average Roman person, to hear that Roman land is being given away to a foreign woman, this was a huge problem. And also, simultaneously, at this point, the son from Julius Caesar, Caesarion, Marc Antony is bringing attention to him and saying this is the true rightful heir of Julius Caesar, the true heir to the throne of Rome.
Octavian realized the danger of such a declaration. He wanted to succeed his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, but was directly threatened by the presence of his legitimate son, Caesarion. If he is to take control of Rome, he must remove the child and defeat Marc Antony.
Marc Antony is declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate. And so Marc Antony and Octavian meet on the battlefield in Greece, off the coast of Corfu, at Actium.
It's September 31 BCE. The stage is set for one of the greatest battles of antiquity, the Battle of Actium.
An epic battle is about to take place. There's a real civil war going on between Octavian's Romans and Marc Antony's Romans, with the addition of Cleopatra's Egyptian troops.
We have 2 armies with roughly the same strength. 250 warships on each side and about 100,000 men.
Cleopatra, as a war leader, is also present on the battlefield, but on her ship were tons of gold, simply because the soldiers had to be paid. So she left with her treasure, which is very important in antiquity.
At first, the outcome of the battle is uncertain. Marc Antony does very well. He's a great soldier. Octavian, on the other hand, is not the expected strategist.
Octavian wasn't necessarily the military mastermind behind all of this. It was actually his general Agrippa. And Agrippa is able to enclose Marc Antony and Cleopatra's fleet within a very small harbor. And what was originally a 6 or 7 month siege against the naval troops ended quite quickly after that.
A bitter defeat for the armies of Marc Antony and Cleopatra, but the battle was far from lost. However, to everyone's surprise, Cleopatra left the scene.
Maybe she's afraid that Octavian's camp will take her ship, which contains her treasure. If she loses her money, she can no longer pay her army, which would trigger a stampede. So she flees. And when Marc Antony sees her fleeing, he loses his nerve and decides to retreat. The story goes that he gets on Cleopatra's ship and makes the return trip to Egypt, sitting on the bow in a state of advanced depression. He literally experiences this as a betrayal, and from then on, the couple don't do well at all.
From a strictly military point of view, it's not a great defeat, but it is an immense diplomatic defeat, you could say. In other words, after Marc Antony and Cleopatra fled, all of Marc Antony's supporters defected to the victor's side, Octavian's side.
In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian arrives in Alexandria and lays siege to the city. Marc Antony tries to resist, but the die is cast. Defeat is inevitable.
Cleopatra, who was a little lost and looking for a political stratagem to get in touch with Octavian and negotiate, perhaps not to keep her kingdom, but in any case to keep her children alive, would spread a rumor.
This rumor marked the beginning of a descent into hell for Marc Antony. As he fights Octavian's army, sword in hand, he learns the terrible news.
He was told that Cleopatra had killed herself.
When Marc Antony hears the news, he's completely thrown off balance. If his queen is dead, why is he fighting?
And at this point in time, suicide was seen as an acceptable way, a way to die with dignity.
Marc Antony is at the bottom of the abyss. In a final act worthy of a Greek tragedy, he decides to commit suicide.
It's argued he either fell on his own sword or stabbed himself in the stomach. We're not exactly sure. But what we do know is that Marc Antony did not immediately die.
He has time to learn that his act is pointless, for in reality, Cleopatra is not dead. She's holed up in her mausoleum north of Alexandria. Upon hearing the news, she immediately sent men to fetch Marc Antony. The rest is legend.
Cleopatra had Marc Antony brought to her, and he basically died in her arms. But ironically, his last words weren't telling her how much he loved her or anything like that. He was asking for another glass of wine, and that's how Marc Antony died.
In the year 30 BCE, Octavian entered Alexandria as a conqueror. His great rival was dead, but he had not finished with Cleopatra.
Cleopatra will first try to negotiate with Octavian. She wants her children to live, especially Caesarion. The problem is, Octavian can't let Caesarion live, since he'd have a real political challenger.
Octavian thinks it's not good for there to be two Caesars. Octavian wants to be Caesar's only son.
Aware of Octavian's motives, Cleopatra hatched a plan to save her son. But Pharaoh Ptolemy 15 Caesarion, then aged 17, was doomed.
Caesarion flees with his tutor, but is betrayed by his tutor and handed over to Octavian, who immediately has him put to death.
And unfortunately, Caesarion, through no action of his own, just by being born to whom he was born, his existence was a threat to Rome.
Did Cleopatra hear the news? It's hard to say, since in the meantime she had been taken prisoner in Alexandria. As Octavian's captive, she feared the same fate as her sister Arsinoe.
She's worried that she will be paraded through Rome in chains, her dignity removed, her royalty thrown out the window. Every aspect of respect that she had for herself was about to be destroyed.
And since poor Cleopatra is desperate and doesn't want to become a trophy, she decides to commit suicide.
History doesn't say whether she decides to kill herself or whether Octavian grants her the right to do so. In any case, that's what she does. And since Cleopatra is a queen, she chooses to make her mark by committing suicide like a queen.
She has a snake brought to her, hidden in a basket of figs. And the snake bites her. The snake bites 3 times, as Cleopatra's 2 followers are also killed by the snake, which then escapes through a palace window.
The snake would have been a symbol of regeneration in the afterlife for Egyptians, and it also would have been a symbol of the underworld for Greeks. So for her to commit suicide using a snake is an ideal blend of both cultures, and it would help maybe guarantee her an entrance into the afterlife.
Cleopatra's death remains a mystery, and it's a mystery that plays an important role in the fantasies we place on Cleopatra, in the myth of Cleopatra.
Cleopatra's death on August 10th, 30 BCE, sounded the death knell for the longest and greatest of all civilizations. After more than 3,000 years of pharaonic history, Egypt became Roman. This put an end to the last civil war of the Roman Republic. Octavian founded the Roman Empire and became the first emperor under the name Augustus. Back in Rome, he showed off his trophies. Cleopatra and Marc Antony's children crossed the streets to the plebes' insults. Pitiless, the emperor had their 2 sons murdered and their daughter forbidden to remember her parents. As for the bodies of Cleopatra and Marc Antony, Octavian agreed to let them remain together.
She was mummified, like all the Ptolemies and like Alexander the Great, and her body was placed in a monumental tomb.
We know that Antony was cremated, so there's no body. But in any case, where is he? Where are these bodies? Where is the queen's body? That's a big question.
It's at that point in time that the mausoleum of Cleopatra disappears into history.
The main reason seems to be Alexandria's geography. Cleopatra's capital is located on a seismic fault, and the city was hit by a series of earthquakes in the Middle Ages. As a result, the ground level has subsided.
We know that Cleopatra's palace would have been in what is now the modern-day eastern harbor of Alexandria, and it's actually underwater, which leads many people to suppose that possibly Cleopatra's tomb might actually be underwater and still maybe accessible to the explorer within all of us.
Cleopatra's tomb has become the grail for a whole generation of Egyptologists, starting with Alicia Johnson, who specializes in underwater archaeology. In the Bay of Alexandria, just a stone's throw from the modern Egyptian city, our teams have obtained exceptional permission to dive in search of traces of the famous pharaoh queen. The area to be surveyed is vast. It stretches across the entire Bay of Alexandria. The team of archaeologists decide to dive just 450 meters from the shore.
We're going to be diving on Cleopatra's site, which is only 6 meters underwater. And it's kind of strange. You would think, why is it only so shallow? But in reality, 2,000 years ago, people were still walking here. So over the course of 2 millennia, you've had earthquakes, erosion, and heightened sea levels. So that's why the site is now submerged, but it's still very accessible because it's only 6 meters underwater.
The amount of sediment and the diving conditions made exploration difficult. We had to carry out the mission over several seasons. And finally, our teams of archaeological divers were able to locate traces of what appear to be the foundations of a Ptolemaic building.
That is a pillar, a Ptolemaic pillar. So although there's not much left of the palace, there are most certainly 1 or 2 pillars that have broken up into multiple different parts, and they are quite impressive, and you can see how they fell over and they've been strewn about the area, and due to weather in environmental conditions. They've moved around over the years, but they're still real close to one another.
These unique testimonies of Egypt's last queen come to us 2,000 years after her death. Will they lead archaeologists to the tomb of this mythical queen and unlock the last secrets of her incredible destiny? In the meantime, she leaves the imprint of a brilliant and charismatic political leader. Cleopatra is remembered as the last pharaoh of Egypt.
She was a superwoman of the past. She has become not only a myth, but an icon. Her abrupt death, it was the X factor. It's what has allowed Cleopatra to remain in our minds.
Cleopatra wanted to leave her mark on her era, but in the end, she crossed the centuries to become immortal in world history.